Initial picked feed analysis and archival logs present the subject indirectly. Deep space imagery captured by long-range recon satellites, telemetry bursts from ancient void transponders, and field reports from servitors assigned to salvage operations. These inputs converge on a single recurring signature, a mass of Calibanite and ruined masonry drifting in anomalous stellar drift, ringed by residual energy fields and mapped as a moving locus of recruitment and secrecy in multiple Admiralty and ecclesiarchal records. Eyewitness transmissions, when available, tend to be terse and heavily redacted. Ship captains report a corpse-like bulk whose sheer surface is studded with gun ports and docking bulks, while Imperial archivists note centuries of ritualistic cataloguing of its contents. Remote archaeology teams who are permitted to catalogue surface strata described carved statues, lintels burned by arcane energy, and entranceways leading into void-shielded chambers that predate Imperial record. These initial sensor and human reports are the reason this dossier was compiled and the reason the subject has been identified consistently across both open and suppressed files as the Rock Fortress Monastery. Records show the Rock to be the consolidated remnant of a destroyed homeworld's fortress, coupled to later Imperial engineering to become a mobile bastion. The fragmentary nature of the mass, a single massive chunk of planetary bedrock, is repeatedly emphasized in primary summaries. The surviving citadel and its surrounding strata were never reconstituted as a planetary surface, but were instead reinforced, bored into and converted into an enclosed complex with tens of kilometers of internal passageways, vaults and docking rings. Archaeology and first-hand reconnaissance are constrained by the custodianship of the chapter that claims the Rock as its own. Access is limited. Much of the early descriptive data comes from third-party observers, Imperial Navy logs, and recovered picked feeds from skirmishes fought in proximity to the mass. Where independent examination was possible, teams reported large-scale drilling operations that extended into the bedrock, producing vast caverns stabilized by Gothic architecture and augmented by machine-forged supports. The interior volumes house ceremonial halls, crypts, armories, workshops bearing inscriptions in archaic High Gothic, and vaults latticed with servo-operated locks. Several salvage schematics, cross-referenced with Admiralty manifests, show the presence of maintenance microfactories and reserves of armoured craft located within docking bays, large enough to accommodate dozens of assault carriers and fighter complements. These functional elements combine to present the Rock as a fortress monastery that preserves chapter ritual while projecting force across the void. The earliest mytho-historical accounts contained in recovered logs place the origin story at a violent fulcrum, a primal planetary catastrophe that removed the chapter's ancestral world from the galaxy's settled map. Contemporary scholarship, catalogued in Imperial histories and corroborated by the chapter's own chronicles, situates the event within a period of large-scale internal conflict and warp turbulence that culminated in the rupture of the homeworld's crust. The surviving stronghold did not entirely perish. Instead, the fortress that crowned a mountain or promontory remained intact, protected by defensive arrays of a potency that allowed structural cohesion despite global annihilation. This remnant, the fortress still girded by ancient protective fields, became the nucleus for a program of long-term conservation, burrowing, grafting, and retrofitting the remaining rock until it became a self-contained mobile bastion with independent propulsion capabilities. The transformation was not instantaneous. It required generations of engineering, vast resource inputs, and a political will to preserve both material and liturgical continuity. Contemporary sensor sweeps record persistent energy emissions from the shell and interior chambers that are anomalous when measured against standard shipboard engineering signatures. These emissions manifest as irregular chain lightning events across the fragment's artificial atmosphere and as fluctuations in localized warp interference that are detectable by navigators and psychers alike. Observation notes included in multiple naval logs indicate that the field is not homogeneous. It contains localized disturbances and pre-existing tiers that respond unpredictably to external attack or to proximity of demonically tainted signatures. Several tactical engagements recorded near the subject note that while the shielding endured planet-shattering forces at the time of the original catastrophe, it now exhibits stressed points where unforeseen breaches have allowed incursions by hostile entities. These technical observations are significant because they define both the defensive capability and the vulnerability profile of the structure. Its protective field is potent but not absolute, and it retains signs of an ancient trauma that continue to influence its behaviour in modern engagements. Custodial doctrine obtained from chapter manuals and corroborating Admiralty appendices indicates a rigid partition between accessible zones and sealed vaults within the rock. The sealed areas, commonly referred to within internal logs as the Tower or Angelicasta, are shrouded by ritual and engineering safeguards. They are maintained by a combination of biomechanical custodians and trusted officers, and their seals are renewed on fixed ceremonial cycles. Within those sealed chambers, archival material and artifacts are stored under conditions that blend liturgical reverence with engineering redundancy, temperature-stabilized reliquaries, anti-corrosive atmospheres, and gravitic stasis fields for items of fragile provenance. The security regimen, as reconstructed from both leaked memoranda and formal release material, implies a culture of secrecy that is institutional, one that places the sanctity of certain knowledge or relics above even standard imperial transparency. This organizational secrecy shapes how outside entities, whether Navy liaisons, Inquisition delegates, or other chapters, interact with the structure, and it explains the heavy redaction on many primary reports. Demography and recruitment patterns tied to the rock are atypical relative to planetary-based chapters. Muster rolls and recruitment manifests recorded in various campaign logs show that while some aspirants are recruited from stationary worlds visited by the fortress, the chapter also integrates elements from worlds encountered episodically during the rock's voyages. This migratory recruitment model produces a heterogeneous chapter composition, brothers who bear the cultural marks of their natal worlds, combined with monastic training practices that aim to erode those cultural differences into a unified chapter identity. The consequence of this model is a chapter that remains decentralized in cultural origin, but centralized in doctrinal practice. The fortress-monastery acts as the crucible where disparate recruit cultures are standardized into the chapter's martial and ritual ethos. Such data originate from cross-referenced recruitment rosters, Admiralty travel logs, and recorded muster procedures embedded in the chapter's canonical materials. Material culture within the rock reveals a hybrid archaeology of the very old and the semi-modern. Architectural fragments that predate known imperial design site adjacent to machine components of later manufacture. Descriptions from salvage crews indicate carved stone guardians and archaic statuary recovered from preserved courtyard ruins, while maintenance schematics published in restricted technical orders depict servo mechanism arrays, void shield emitters, and warp drive components retrofitted to the rock's mass. These juxtaposed elements underscore the structure's layered history. It is at once an artifact of a pre-imperial past and an active construct of current martial engineering. The archaeological implication is clear. The rock preserves technocultural strata that allow comparative studies across technological epochs, provided that researchers can gain sanctioned access to the deeper repositories. Operationally, the rock functions as both a strategic mobile base and a repository for contested history. Naval engagement records and campaign plans demonstrate that its armament arrays place it in the class of high-value assets. Sensor reports and after-action technical appendices indicate multiple lance and macrocannon emplacements along its exposed flanks, torpedo tubes concealed within reinforced alcoves, and hangar complexes capable of deploying fighter wings and assault carriers. Combined Arms Doctrine documents that mention the structure portray it as a force multiplier. Its presence alters fleet dispositions by providing forward repair capability, rapid strike assets, and secure logistic hubs at a scale uncommon for a single chapter. The architecture of defense and offense embedded in the rock's design implies a sustained capacity to influence theater-level operations, while simultaneously protecting the chapter's monastic and archival functions. Ritual and liturgy are materially embedded in the fortress-monastery's spatial ordering. Field reports by ecclesiarchal envoys and the chapter's own ritual registries indicate that certain corridors, halls, and crypts are designated for ceremonies that recur across the chapter's long chronology. The ceremonial spaces are often lined with relics, banners, and carved iconography that reference both the chapter's martial history and a lineage of condemnation and penitence. The presence of special interment chambers, codex reliquaries, and sanctified forging halls implies an institutional memory preserved in material form, an archive that is curated as religious practice as much as historical preservation. This interweaving of belief and archive is significant for both internal cohesion and for the chapter's posture towards external inquiries. The archival function cannot be extricated from the spiritual framework that legitimizes custodianship. The rock's corridors and vaults have been witness to conflict across multiple eras. Combat narratives archived in campaign logs include assaults that reached into the mass's docking bays and skirmishes that spilled into the lower caverns. These engagements have left physical traces documented in salvage reports: breached bulkheads repaired with disparate materials, seal burn marks in maintenance logs, and anomalous matter residues catalogued in forensic appendices. Tactical analyses prepared after these conflicts emphasize that conflict within the rock's interior is environment-driven. Narrow corridors, precipitous drops into maintenance wells, and labyrinthine sublevels favor small unit tactics and close engagement. As a result, the chapter's defensive doctrine within the mass relies heavily on close-quarters proficiency, preset traps within access tunnels, and rapid redeployment of Terminator and assault companies to contain breaches. These tactical and forensic details are recorded in both military and salvage files, and are used to brief visiting Imperial command elements prior to any sanctioned interaction. Finally, the rock's symbolic weight is not merely martial, it shapes political and doctrinal relationships. Admiralty communiques and restricted correspondence reveal that navies and ecclesiarchal authorities treat the structure as a semi-autonomous node whose internal governance is enshrined by both martial necessity and ritual claim. Delegations seeking audience or requesting access are processed through a protocol that balances strategic bargaining with deference to chapter secrecy. The dynamism of the rock as both a movable stronghold and a closed archive ensures that it remains a persistent variable in wider strategic calculations. Fleets alter patrol routes when the rock is present. Recruitment patterns shift to align with its pauses, and ecclesiarchal priorities adapt to the presence of its relics. For any comprehensive study into the structure's role in galactic affairs, these political and doctrinal interactions are as relevant as the physical and archaeological descriptions. Raw data from orbital auguries, coupled with multi-spectrum sensor arrays and reconnaissance pict feeds, provide the foundation for the present analysis of the rock's environmental profile. The concept of flora and fauna must here be treated as symbolic rather than literal. Unlike a living world, the rock sustains no native biosphere, no soil layers, and no organic ecology beyond those imported or cultivated under artificial maintenance. What little life persists upon or within its confines exists solely by human or machine design. Gene-tailored sustenance organisms, oxygenating lichens within closed-cycle vaults, and the occasional verminous population of stowaway pests that have adapted to artificial gravity in confined spaces. The absence of sunlight, weather, or hydrological cycles means that all biological presence is sustained through deliberate technological equilibrium rather than natural reproduction. In the earliest planetary remnants that formed the rock's base, fragmentary geological analysis reveals the faint fossilized imprints of Calibanite lifeforms, now only mineral ghosts. These remnants were discovered within strata sealed beneath meters of basalt and fused masonry, remnants of a destroyed biosphere frozen at the moment of planetary disintegration. The surviving stone still carries microtraces of that lost ecology, calcified root tunnels of extinct forests, crystalline residues that once formed from organic decomposition, and occasional impressions of insectoid wings or chitin plates pressed into metamorphic seams. The temperature and pressure during the original cataclysm fused much of this material into silicate, preserving outlines but erasing biological composition. Hence, what remains within the rock's core is not life, but the petrified memory of life. This fossilized layer serves as an unintentional museum, one that silently records the environmental profile of Caliban before its destruction. Cross-referenced biological models indicate that the world once hosted a dense temperate biome, dominated by predatory megafauna and arboreal giants. These environmental details are essential to understanding the psychological and ritual significance that the structure now holds for its custodians. The fortress-monastery literally sits upon the bones of its progenitor world, its corridors burrowed through what were once living roots and forest floors. This layering of memory upon metal is part of the fortress's unique geography, where natural and artificial strata coexist as both engineering and theology. The artificial habitats within the rock are arranged according to function and necessity. Internal biomes exist in small quantities. Oxygen gardens and hydroponic sectors line the inner decks, sustained by nutrient flows recycled through the fortress's massive filtration systems. These sectors are compact and mechanized. Rows of genetically engineered algae and microflora provide oxygen regeneration and food supplements. Their lighting cycles simulate planetary daylight with programmed spectrums designed to maximize growth and maintain true circadian rhythm. The flora cultivated within these vaults are sterile strains, unable to reproduce beyond system regulation, to prevent uncontrolled propagation or contamination of sacred spaces. The design intent is strictly utilitarian: sustenance, air renewal, and aesthetic minimalism to prevent psychological fatigue among the garrisoned population. Beyond these controlled gardens, the rock supports a range of parasitic and accidental life forms, many of which are considered endemic by now. These include pharaoh rats, void mites, and spore colonies that thrive within the fortress's moist condensation vents. Most were unplanned migrants introduced through centuries of interstellar docking. The pharaoh rats, for instance, are small metallic furred scavengers adapted to subsist on trace oils and insulation residue. Records from maintenance logs show periodic purges of such creatures when infestations threaten wiring conduits or sanctified machinery. Similarly, the presence of bioluminescent mold along the outer rock layers has been noted to interfere with sensor readings. These molds, however, have found limited use in certain maintenance subdecks, where they serve as natural luminescence markers in zones deprived of power. Faunal presence beyond the incidental is largely restricted to chapter relics and preserved specimens of symbolic importance. Taxidermied predators from Caliban's ancient forests remain displayed in ceremonial chambers. They are treated not as museum pieces but as totems of heritage, manifestations of the chapter's ancestral struggle against the monstrous wilderness that once defined their homeworld. Gene-sequenced clones of these beasts were reportedly attempted centuries ago using preserved tissue samples, but no verified record confirms that any survived the process. The chapter's biotechs maintain a few tissue cultures in stasis vaults, though their purpose today is primarily symbolic rather than experimental. From a geographical standpoint, the rock cannot be treated in planetary terms. It possesses no latitude or longitude, only decks and levels, each assigned designations that correspond to ancient geographic metaphors: the northern bastions, southern foundries, and western crypts. These are not true cardinal directions, but functional analogues used to preserve the illusion of territorial orientation. The internal geography of the rock is vertically stratified, deep mining shafts and ancient stone caverns forming the lowest layers, administrative halls and chapels occupying the midsection, and command spires and weapon batteries capping the upper strata. Between these, immense transit shafts, cargo lifts, and pressurized tunnels allow movement of personnel and materiel. In some sectors, geography overlaps with ritual. For instance, the Halls of Remembrance, are built directly into the caldera-like depression of the original fortress, while the Hall of the Watchers crowns the outermost layer where the ancient rock meets void steel plating. The geological foundation itself remains of scientific interest. Core scans from Mechanicus expeditions indicate that the remaining bedrock consists of layered metamorphic stone fused with artificial adamantium latticework. These geological modifications stabilize the mass against internal stress caused by propulsion. Portions of the interior still exhibit fracture veins glowing faintly with residual warp energy, a side effect of the original planetary cataclysm. Magos records describe these veins as warp-burnt scars, areas where the boundary between real space and the immaterium thinned briefly during the world's destruction. The energy remains trapped in crystalline deposits, producing localized gravitational and electromagnetic anomalies. Within the fortress, such anomalies are treated as sacred zones, sealed and monitored but rarely altered. They are believed to represent physical evidence of divine or infernal intervention. Externally, the geography of the rock is defined by the sheer irregularity of its surface. Viewed from orbit, its outline is that of an immense jagged promontory, broken free from a planet's crust. Cliff faces several kilometers high descend into darkness, punctuated by colossal fortifications that merge seamlessly with natural stone. The transition between geological and mechanical material is gradual. There are no clear boundaries where the mountain ends and the fortress begins. Deep scars and fault lines run across its visible face, the remnants of both ancient seismic destruction and later excavation. These scars are not repaired, for they serve as both physical and symbolic reminders of origin. Docking rings and propulsion arrays are embedded within these fractures, their surfaces sheathed in adamantium plating. Sensor imagery reveals vents that bleed ionized gas into the void, evidence of sustained internal power generation. The geography of the exterior, therefore, is an engineered landscape, once natural terrain, now repurposed into an armor shell. The original Calibanite stone forms the substrate for weapon emplacements, observation galleries, and hangar access tunnels, all of which are sealed by layered void shields. In places, the rock's face is polished smooth to reflect lightless space. In others, it is jagged and cratered, preserving the violent texture of its birth. Meteorological discussion, in the context of the rock, refers to the artificial atmospheric and environmental systems maintained within its enclosed structure, rather than any natural weather. The internal climate control is highly stratified. Lower sections maintain near-tropical humidity to support hydroponic agriculture and machinery coolant cycles, while upper sanctums are kept cool and arid to prevent corrosion of relics and mechanical components. Artificial rain is produced in enclosed reservoirs for filtration and symbolic cleansing rituals, but never allowed to condense uncontrollably. Temperature gradients are regulated through geothermal extraction from the stone core and radiant heat vents along the upper armor. Thus, the fortress possesses a full atmospheric cycle, but one completely engineered and algorithmically maintained. External meteorology, meaning the immediate void environment, is far less stable. The rock's slow drift through the galactic plane subjects it to varying stellar radiation and cosmic particulate density. Data collected from sensor buoys record frequent electromagnetic disturbances surrounding the fortress, believed to be remnants of warp field turbulence from its planetary destruction. These phenomena manifest as auroral flashes and brief static storms across the surface shielding. Crew assigned to external maintenance record sensations of static discharge, luminous arcs trailing along the hull, and low-frequency vibrations that pass through the armor plates. Some Mechanicus adepts attribute these fluctuations to imperfect field harmonization between the fortress's shielding and its residual warp scars. Others, less empirical, claim it to be the lingering breath of the world that once was. On rare occasions, localized weather-like phenomena appear within the outer cavities, areas where trace atmosphere is vented during repairs. In these brief intervals, microgravity debris, frozen moisture, and plasma residue create the illusion of fog or drifting snow, illuminated by the glow of the fortress's defense grids. These transient effects have been described in maintenance journals as storms within the stone, though they are technically venting incidents rather than atmospheric processes. The cumulative meteorological profile of the rock can therefore be summarized as an engineered equilibrium. Its climate serves functional and ritual needs, while the void around it perpetuates a ghostly imitation of weather through radiation and plasma interactions. Together they produce an environmental duality: inside, controlled order; outside, perpetual cosmic turbulence. This dichotomy aligns with the fortress's thematic existence between life and death, world and void, secrecy and revelation. In total, the rock's ecology is a study in deliberate absence, an environment where life endures only by mechanical intervention and nature exists as fossil, simulation, or ghost. Its geography is carved from trauma, its climate an algorithmic illusion, and its remaining living forms are either engineered utility organisms or symbolic relics of a long-extinct world. Every metre of its surface and interior serves as a layered record of transformation, from natural mountain to sanctified citadel, from biosphere to archive. In this manner, the rock continues to embody the death and preservation of a planet, floating forever through void space as both a tomb and a fortress. Initial records detailing the key events surrounding the rock are fragmented, originating from multiple strata of Imperial record, naval archives, administratum ledgers, and mechanicus data extracts, all partially redacted or sanitized under order of higher authority. Cross-referencing these incomplete fragments has allowed the construction of a timeline that traces the fortress's transformation from planetary citadel to mobile monastery. These events form the backbone of the rock's historical identity, a sequence of catastrophes, salvations, and concealments that define not only the structure's architecture, but the philosophy of those who inhabit it. The earliest and most defining event remains the destruction of its homeworld, Caliban. Historical consensus aligns around the closing years of the Great Crusade and the onset of the civil war later known as the Horus Heresy. Caliban, once a world of Gothic forests, stone fortresses, and knightly orders, became a battleground for ideological fracture. The garrisoned fortress, at that time the primary bastion of the First Legion, was both a symbol of unity and an axis of schism. Pict records preserved within Mechanicus archives describe escalating orbital bombardments and atmospheric ruptures as loyalist and traitor forces engaged in mutual annihilation. The planet's surface cracked under sustained bombardment, releasing geothermal stress and warp energy that had accumulated beneath its crust. The event's energy readings, extrapolated from surviving sensors, exceed those of standard exterminatus protocols, implying both natural and supernatural catalysts. At the moment of planetary collapse, the fortress that would become the rock endured where the rest of the world did not. It remained shielded within layers of void field and ancient energy barriers whose design has never been fully replicated. How these defenses were activated, whether by deliberate human action or by residual warp resonance, remains undetermined. Imperial sources simply record that the fortress and the mountain beneath it survived the detonation intact while the rest of Caliban disintegrated into a storm of debris and vaporized stone. What followed was the birth of the rock, a fragment of planetary mass cast into the void, containing within it the surviving infrastructure and personnel of the First Legion's home fortress. The next chronological event of note concerns the stabilization and conversion of that fragment into a functioning bastion. Recovery fleets under Imperial command discovered the Remnant decades after the Heresy, orbiting amid the debris field of its destroyed parent world. The initial inspection reports described the rock as a void-locked tomb, drifting and partially powered. Once recontact was established with surviving personnel within, the process of reconstruction began. The Mechanicus, alongside surviving Legion artisans, reinforced the fragment with adamantium plating, installed propulsion drives, and converted inner halls into livable sections. Over the course of centuries, this effort transformed the static ruin into a self-sustaining citadel capable of warp travel. The fortress thus entered its second phase of existence, not as a planetary monument but as a vessel of secrecy and atonement. Records from subsequent millennia indicate that the rock served as both a mobile fortress and an isolated monastery from which the chapter, by then known as the Dark Angels, operated in near-complete independence. Key events tied to this period are often described through implication rather than open statement. Administratum files reference unexplained absences of the fortress from star charts and the sudden reappearance of entire fleets bearing its insignia during imperial crusades or purgations. When the rock appeared, campaigns often concluded swiftly and decisively. When it vanished, inquiries were discouraged. The fortress had become both a symbol of authority and a shroud for internal operations that exceeded standard imperial oversight. Among these veiled episodes, several stand out as structurally verifiable. The rock's participation in the cleansing of the Soros campaign is one such event, though official documents refrain from specifying its operational details. Witness accounts from Imperial Navy officers describe the fortress as an anchor point for orbital bombardments, its batteries decimating enemy fleets in near silence. Decades later, similar descriptions emerge from the Pesina 4 campaign, where the rock functioned as both command node and sanctuary for reinforcement companies. These fragments confirm its continued martial use, even as its deeper purpose remained concealed. The internal events occurring within the fortress during these centuries remain obscured under oath and secrecy. Yet recovered testimonies and the occasional intercepted transmission suggest that significant internal trials and purges occurred within its walls, rituals of interrogation and judgment directed at individuals or entire companies. The fortress, in these accounts, serves as a court and prison as much as a monastery. Reinforced cells, referred to as penitent vaults, occupy its deeper levels. There are records, though faint, of individuals being taken below and never emerging, their identities erased from official ledgers. The rock thus functions as both sanctuary and purgatory, a duality that defines its later mythology. Another notable event occurred in the 41st millennium during the assault of the Chaos warlord known as the Despoiler. The rock's presence during this period is cross-referenced in naval dispatches relating to the Gothic War. Though never officially declared part of the campaign, the fortress's transponder signature was detected near the Cadian Gate region, where it appeared briefly on multiple Auspex networks before vanishing. The Inquisition's appended notes to those same files reference unverified reports of a massive stellar object of imperial design displacing through the warp corridor without authorization. The lack of formal reprimand following such an unauthorized warp transit implies either political immunity or deliberate ignorance by imperial authorities. The most critical incident of modern record remains the invasion of the rock itself by demonic forces during the 13th Black Crusade. In this event, a rift in the Imperium opened within one of the lower sanctums, allowing a chaos incursion into the heart of the fortress. Eyewitness logs and combat reports from the chapter's own archivists record fierce fighting in the internal corridors, with multiple decks sealed and purged to contain the infestation. Psyche readings indicate that the incursion originated near the so-called Tower, a sealed inner sanctum said to house relics or entities from Caliban's destruction. The resulting engagement caused significant structural damage, and the fortress's orbit was temporarily destabilized before containment was achieved. The event was never widely publicized, but Mechanicus maintenance records confirm extensive reconstruction in the decades that followed. These key events, taken together, demonstrate a consistent pattern. The rock's history alternates between visibility and secrecy, intervention and concealment. Each period of recorded action is followed by intervals of silence, as though the fortress, and those within, withdraw deliberately to obscure the true extent of their activities. The physical mobility of the fortress enables this cyclical disappearance. By design, the rock can translate through the warp without escort, sustain itself for centuries, and emerge at coordinates of its choosing. Its captains are answerable to no external authority save the Emperor himself, though practical politics ensure that few ever challenge that claim. The final fate of Caliban, the world from which the rock was torn remains immutable. No reconstruction effort was ever attempted. Survey probes dispatched in later millennia found only fragments of planetary debris orbiting a dead sun. The destruction was total, atmospheric remnants had dissipated, and all surface traces were reduced to radioactive slag. What fragments remained were incorporated into the rock itself, repurposed as memorial stone within its halls. Hence, the planet's physical body became the fortress's material substance, a transformation from living world to sacred architecture. The rock in this sense is Caliban reborn in miniature, carrying its memory and its sins alike. As for the fortress's ultimate fate, no terminal entry exists. The rock continues to operate as a mobile monastery, its location and trajectory known only to a select inner circle. Its current position, by design, remains unrecorded in any accessible registry. Occasional warp echo readings suggest intermittent movement along the galactic northwest quadrant, though such readings may be misdirectional. Officially, it is listed by the administratum as active, location classified. In effect, the rock endures outside ordinary timekeeping, a vessel of perpetual motion. In theoretical discussions among Imperial scholars, several interpretations of the rock's final destiny have been proposed. The most pragmatic holds that it will persist indefinitely until either its propulsion systems fail or its custodians abandon it. The more theological interpretation, common among ecclesiastical circles, envisions the rock one day returning to the site of Caliban's death, where it will descend into the void as both penance and closure. Mechanicus thinkers, conversely, regard it as an evolving macro-relic, a technological organism that will eventually surpass its human operators in endurance and complexity, continuing to drift long after the Imperium itself has changed beyond recognition. From an analytical standpoint, the structure's final fate cannot be divorced from its symbolic function. It serves as the material manifestation of memory, an indestructible remnant of both triumph and failure. Its survival beyond the death of its world mirrors the Imperium's own paradox: preservation through decay, continuity through secrecy. Even if the rock were someday destroyed, the archetype it represents, faith bound to stone, secrecy bound to survival, would persist in the collective psyche of the Imperium. In the current epoch, as the galaxy fractures under new wars and emergent warp phenomena, the rock remains unaccounted for in formal fleet records. Its movements are rumoured, its sightings transient, and its transmissions encoded beyond Mechanicus decryption. It continues to serve its purpose: a fortress, a monastery, a prison, and a secret that refuses to die. Its story, like the fragments of Caliban embedded in its core, is incomplete and ongoing. When records concerning the rock first reached the clerical offices of the Adeptus Administratum, the initial response was one of procedural ambiguity rather than alarm. The fortress monastery's nature, simultaneously a relic, a home, and a mobile stronghold, did not fit neatly within any existing categorization. To the Administratum, the construct was neither a planet nor a station, neither fully classified as an orbital nor a mobile platform. Its ownership and jurisdiction fell to the First Legion, the Dark Angels, whose internal secrecy complicated all attempts at standardized record-keeping. Even within the sanctified bureaucracy of the Imperium, this combination of mystery and authority demanded both caution and reverence. The first official document describing the rock is dated to Millennia 39, recorded under the title De Logi Obscure Monasteri, a compilation of fortress monastery classifications for ecclesiastical and military reference. The entry for the rock is truncated, consisting of only a single line appended to the bottom of a larger chart. Primary fortress of the First Legion, location and trajectory undisclosed by chapter decree. Even this line was later removed from several archival copies following the Legion's reclassification as a chapter after the second founding. By Millennia 41, the fortress monastery had achieved near mythical status in administratum ledgers, its designation often cited, rarely detailed, and almost never questioned. Administratum scribes accustomed to charting planetary tithe routes and fortress boundaries found themselves constrained by the rock's elusive nature. The Dark Angel's refusal to disclose its orbital pattern or physical coordinates rendered most attempts at spatial verification impossible. Correspondence between certain regional offices and the Departmentum Munitorum reveals subtle frustration at the continued absence of measurable data. In an excerpt from the correspondence of sub-archivist Audelian Trask, attached to Segmentum Solar Record Batch 931, he writes, "This fortress-monastery behaves neither as an immovable bastion nor as a vessel proper. It eludes classification under any logistical standard known to the Adeptus Administratum, yet its influence is recognized by nearly all imperial military branches." The Adeptus Mechanicus, meanwhile, approached the rock from a perspective of technological reverence mixed with restraint. For them, it was a subject of fascination but also a boundary. Access to the fortress was strictly limited by the Dark Angels, whose oaths of secrecy extended to the machine rights and maintenance processes aboard. Only a few Mechanicus representatives, selected for discretion and loyalty, were ever allowed within its sealed halls. Even they were restricted to auxiliary systems, void shielding calibrations, plasma reactor maintenance, and orbital correction sequences, while the deeper power sources remained under chapter control. Reports from the Mechanicus contain repeated allusions to an ancient core deep within the rock's substrata. Although not explicitly identified in Mechanicus scripture, it is believed by many within the Forge worlds to be a surviving fragment of Caliban itself, fused and reshaped through the combined efforts of Dark Angels artificers and the machine priests of Mars. Explorator Magos Heston Vallis described it as an admixture of geological and artificial composition, operating in seamless cooperation. The rock is not merely a structure but a hybrid entity, a mountain engineered into a machine enshrined as a fortress. The process by which the Mechanicus documented the rock diverged significantly from traditional protocols. Ordinarily, any structure of this magnitude would be subjected to a comprehensive rite of origin, tracing its construction lineage, technological ancestry, and the signatures of its fabricators. In this case, the rite was never fully completed. The Dark Angels refused to disclose the full schematics of the fortress or the precise methods by which they transformed the remnants of their destroyed homeworld into a spaceborne bastion. Only fragmentary records survive, each labelled under restricted Mechanicus sub-classifications: Object Designata, Calibanus, Fragmentum Primus. The procedural documentation of the rock required the cooperation of both the Administratum and Mechanicus, but neither institution truly possessed oversight. Administratum officers sought to establish a baseline understanding of its tithe contribution. None was required, as the Dark Angels were exempt by Astartes' charter. Mechanicus representatives attempted to standardize its machine rights. Most were rejected, as the chapter performed its own rituals and maintenance independently. This dual exclusion left both institutions with incomplete archives and raised quiet frustration within their hierarchies. Nevertheless, fragments of compliance exist. A Mechanicus audit from Millennia 41, sub-year 221, details partial readings from a communication relay briefly synchronized with the rock during its proximity to the eastern fringe. The audit notes low-level transmissions consistent with deep core plasma furnaces and gravitic anchoring fields, far beyond standard chapter ship-grade output. Such readings implied a power source of planetary scale, supporting the speculation that the fortress's mass still retains the gravitational field of its original planetary bedrock. In effect, the rock behaves not as a ship moving through void space, but as a mobile mountain capable of generating its own microgravity envelope. The Adeptus Mechanicus continued to maintain a cautious distance from direct investigation, constrained by both political and religious boundaries. To question the workings of the rock was to question the sanctity of the First Legion's heritage, a matter bordering on heresy. Even so, there exist redacted testimonies from several tech priests who claim to have observed deeper anomalies within the fortress's structure. Machines that predated the Imperium, machinery fused with bedrock that resonated with unknown frequencies. Some speculate that portions of the ancient Calibanite surface still live in a form of suspended stasis, their geological patterns stabilized by Dark Angel technomancy. Administratum impressions, by contrast, focused less on the machine mysteries and more on the logistical implications of a fortress-monastery capable of indefinite relocation. Their archivists viewed the rock as both an administrative inconvenience and a symbol of perfect operational autonomy. One internal report to the High Lords of Terror describes it as a roving fortress of silence, bearing with it both the honour and secrecy of the Imperium's earliest warriors. This same report concludes that the fortress monastery, despite its lack of official oversight, demonstrates the functional ideal of an Astartes chapter, entirely self-sustaining, fully independent, and beyond reproach. The documentation process surrounding the rock followed a recurring cycle: request, denial, annotation, and archival seal. Every few centuries, an administratum review would attempt to reassess the chapter's holdings for purposes of tithe recalibration or imperial census. Each time, the Dark Angels provided identical statements, formally respectful yet devoid of specific content. Our fortress remains mobile, its coordinates are of no concern to the Imperium, our oaths are fulfilled, our duties unbroken. With that, the administratum would mark the inquiry as complete and transfer the file to restricted storage. Mechanicus' procedure proved similarly restrained. The fortress monastery was placed under the designation Machina Silentia Primus, an unclassified object considered beyond full Mechanicus jurisdiction. The designation served both as acknowledgement and as a warning that any further interference would violate the oaths exchanged between Mars and the First Legion during the time of the Great Crusade. From this agreement stemmed a mutual understanding. The rock would be maintained by its chapter alone, though Mechanicus watch rites could be performed remotely through encoded transmissions. The documentation of these transmissions, preserved in binary format across multiple Forge worlds, forms the largest surviving body of technical information about the rock. Each dataset contains minute fluctuations in energy output, reactor synchronization patterns, and void shield modulation, all consistent with a structure several kilometers in diameter and thousands of years in operation. No significant deviations were recorded, suggesting a near-perfect preservation of its systems despite constant movement through the void. For the Mechanicus, this represented both a marvel and a paradox: technology enduring across millennia without degradation, yet inaccessible to the very priesthood sworn to preserve it. It is often said among the data scribes of the Martian archives that the rock itself behaves as a sealed machine prayer, a self-contained hymn to the machine god, locked in endless function. The Dark Angels, in their silence, appear to treat the fortress not as property but as a sacred organism. Every engine pulse, every atmospheric calibration, every shield fluctuation is a liturgical act. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, this renders it both perfect and untouchable. To the Adeptus Administratum, it renders it inscrutable. What emerges from both bureaucratic and technological accounts is the same conclusion. The rock resists definition. It cannot be neatly categorized as a planet, a fortress, or a ship. Its documentation stands as a compromise between acknowledgement and ignorance, a monument both to the might of the Imperium and to the limits of its own understanding. In every surviving record, whether from the parchment halls of Terror or the cogitator chambers of Mars, one constant remains. The rock is always present, always functioning, and always beyond the reach of full documentation. And yet, within these gaps of knowledge, the fortress maintains its purpose unbroken, the eternal home of the Dark Angels, the living remnant of Caliban, and a symbol of both pride and penance. From a geological standpoint, the rock remains one of the most anomalous constructs ever to be catalogued, if such an act can even be called complete. The Adeptus Mechanicus refers to its composition as geomechanically hybridized substrata, a term first appearing in the sealed records of Explorator Fleet Sigma 49, who conducted remote material scans during a brief window of proximity in Millennia 41, year 172. Those readings revealed densities consistent with basaltic and ferric composites, layered with metallic strata typically found in Mechanicus-engineered infrastructure rather than natural planetary rock. In simple terms, the fortress appears to be both a mountain and a machine, a remnant of Caliban's surface reforged by technology into a void-worthy citadel. Though precise measurements are impossible due to the Dark Angel's restrictions, indirect readings gathered through Auspex reflection and gravitic mapping indicate that the primary mass of the rock spans approximately 70 kilometers in diameter, with a depth extending 15 kilometers from its highest plateau to its lowest artificial bedrock layer. The original crustal segments still display signs of planetary-scale pressure fissures, indicating that the section of Caliban that became the rock was forcibly detached from the planet's core during the world's destruction. Some Mechanicus scholars theorize that the detachment was not entirely natural, that fragments of Caliban were stabilized and reinforced through Dark Angel engineering before the final catastrophic rupture. These geological anomalies sparked further inquiry from the Forge Worlds, though such efforts were largely symbolic given the secrecy of the chapter. Data recovered from long-range scans suggest that the rock's interior still retains natural caverns that once belonged to the mountain ranges of Caliban. These caverns, now sealed within layers of armor plating and adaptive shielding, form much of the fortress's subterranean corridors and hangar vaults. Residual magnetic signatures indicate that certain veins of Calibanite iron remain active within the fortress's foundation, producing fluctuating field distortions that assist in maintaining its microgravitic stability during warp travel. The Mechanicus classification of the material known as Calibanite ferrum describes it as a dense metallic ore compound, exhibiting unusual structural resilience. When alloyed with adamantium and plasteel, it forms a lattice capable of self-reinforcing under high stress, a phenomenon once observed in the ruins of Caliban's knightly fortresses. In the rock, this alloy likely forms the basis of its outer hull, granting it exceptional resistance to impact and heat. Unlike most void-faring constructs, which rely on external armor layers and redundant void shielding, the rock's geological mass itself acts as a natural defense system. Magos Telkar of the Explorator Corps once proposed a model for the fortress's internal load distribution. His treatise, Mechanica Calibanica, argues that the lower strata of the rock operate as a series of tectonic anchors, using adaptive servo plates embedded within the mountain's crust to stabilize it against gravitational drift. The upper levels, by contrast, contain reinforced structural ribs supporting the fortress's numerous launch bays and cathedral complexes. These ribs are likely powered by plasma conduits that run through the old magma channels of Caliban, now converted into thermal energy routes for atmospheric regulation and reactor cooling. The central geological core of the rock remains a mystery even to those within the Mechanicus who have studied it indirectly for centuries. Energy readings suggest the presence of a deep sub-core reactor, possibly derived from an ancient pre-imperial technology or modified Dark Age of technology relic. The theory posits that when Caliban was destroyed, the Dark Angels salvaged this power source from the ruins of their planetary fortress and integrated it within the fragment that would become the rock. This would explain the near-constant stability of the fortress's environmental systems, which have remained operational for over 10,000 years with no recorded shutdown. Another feature of interest is the electromagnetic field that surrounds the fortress. It is notably irregular compared to standard Imperial void installations, fluctuating at intervals consistent with organic seismic patterns rather than mechanical cycles. The Mechanicus interprets this as evidence that the geological matter within the rock is not entirely inert. Portions of its core may still retain seismic memory, resonating with the same rhythms once present in Caliban's mantle. In effect, the fortress still breathes as a planet might, its structure flexing in imperceptible ways under gravitational influence. This pseudo-biological behaviour led to the coining of a phrase within the Mars data shrines, terra muta mechanicus, meaning the living machine stone. Some tech priests regard the rock as an evolutionary stage between natural formation and engineered construct, a unique synthesis of geology and design that could not be replicated through any known process. The secrecy of the Dark Angels ensures that such knowledge remains theoretical. No samples of the rock's material have ever been officially obtained, and any attempt to extract or analyze fragments during its rare appearances near Imperial space has been met with refusal or direct intervention by the chapter's vessels. Despite these barriers, the geological properties of the rock continue to fascinate Imperial science. The most recent Mechanicus analytical dataset, designation dataset 442 Mars Ballastar, cross-referenced the fortress's recorded movement with gravitational disruptions detected by deep void monitoring stations. The results confirmed that the rock's gravitational signature is not consistent with its estimated mass. It appears to generate an internal gravitational dampening field, allowing it to maintain stable orbit and controlled trajectory, even in proximity to other planetary bodies. This capability, while theoretically achievable through standard gravitic engines, is unmatched in efficiency. No known Imperial ship of equivalent mass demonstrates such low energy loss during maneuvering. From a strategic standpoint, this feature alone elevates the rock to a position of unparalleled advantage. Its capacity to relocate silently and maintain indefinite position above or beyond planetary orbits grants the Dark Angels operational reach that most chapters cannot replicate. Administratum analysts often describe it as a floating fortress world, one capable of sustaining itself indefinitely without resupply. Records show that the rock contains its own atmospheric processing systems, vast hydroponic bays, and subsurface aquifers recycled from Caliban's original water channels. These internal systems provide a closed-loop ecosystem, ensuring the chapter's long-term survival even if isolated from Imperial contact for centuries. In tactical terms, the rock functions as both fortress and command vessel. Its mass and armour density make it nearly impervious to orbital bombardment, while its internal hangar bays can launch entire companies of space marines aboard Thunderhawks, Storm Ravens, and orbital drop pods simultaneously. Administratum projections estimate a full deployment capability of over 10,000 personnel, including chapter serfs, servitors, and auxiliary support. The exact number of active Dark Angels remains unrecorded, though some estimates suggest that reserve companies and successor elements occasionally dock within its hangars, using the rock as a temporary garrison or repair bastion. From the perspective of the Adeptus Administratum, this autonomy presents both a strength and a bureaucratic challenge. The rock's mobile nature renders it exempt from most planetary tithe systems and logistical accounting, complicating the Imperium's ability to quantify its military assets. Its lack of a fixed location also allows the Dark Angels to respond rapidly to threats across multiple sectors, without notice or delay. As a result, the fortress-monastery is considered an independent logistical anomaly, a status shared only by a handful of other Astartes installations, such as the phalanx of the Imperial Fists. Strategically, the rock serves as both a deterrent and a reminder. The Adeptus Mechanicus regard it as the perfect union of machine and faith, an object that exists in defiance of conventional limits, yet remains wholly loyal to the Emperor's design. The Administratum, on the other hand, treats it as a symbol of imperial permanence, a mobile bastion that has survived cataclysm, heresy, and the slow decay of the ages. Both institutions recognize that its strategic value lies not only in its weaponry or defenses, but in its very existence. It is a monument of endurance, a living relic that projects the image of stability across the Imperium's fractured domains. Some theoretical analyses conducted within the Martian forges suggest that the rock's engines could be capable of limited warp translation, allowing the fortress to travel independently through the immaterium. While this remains unverified, the hypothesis is supported by scattered reports of the Dark Angels appearing across distant war zones within impossibly short timeframes, If true, this would make the rock not merely a fortress monastery, but a mobile fortress world capable of interstellar deployment. The strategic implications are profound. A self-contained strike base, immune to standard naval detection, able to reposition anywhere within the galaxy without logistical dependency. This speculation has led to cautious debate within the Adeptus Mechanicus. A faction known as the Red Solarians proposed a study into warp-reactive geological stabilization, the same principle they believe allows the rock to survive warp exposure without disintegration. The theory involves the reinforcement of geological matter with a lattice of null-field resonators, effectively anchoring the physical structure in both real space and the warp simultaneously. Such technology, if real, would represent a rediscovery of ancient human science long thought lost. However, without Dark Angel cooperation, the theory remains untested and unverifiable. To the Administratum, the fortress's strategic role is far simpler. The rock embodies deterrence through mystery. No planetary governor, rogue trader, or Xenos fleet can predict its presence or absence, and its mere mention is enough to stabilize nearby systems through psychological effect. Imperial worlds aware of the Dark Angel's mobile fortress often maintain higher compliance rates, believing that surveillance or intervention may occur at any time. Administratum studies into this phenomenon, recorded under the sociological codex Silent Oversight Doctrine, describe it as faith-based pacification. In essence, the fortress's reputation maintains order even in its absence. The rock's geological resilience also grants it unprecedented defensive endurance. Hypothetical simulations conducted by the Mechanicus suggest that even direct bombardment from a Retribution-class battleship would fail to breach its outer layers. The combination of ancient stone, reforged adamantium, and gravitic shielding results in an impact absorption capacity nearly 10 times that of standard orbital stations. For this reason, the fortress is often described in Imperial lexicons as unassailable. This term is not hyperbole but a technical conclusion. No record exists of the rock ever sustaining serious structural damage. Its energy management system further enhances this defense. Internal reactor harmonics distribute power evenly across its crustal network, preventing overloads or thermal concentration. Even under maximum stress, the fortress's cooling channels, formerly Caliban's natural magma conduits, allow it to vent heat into the void efficiently. In practice, this means the rock can endure prolonged engagements without the risk of internal collapse. This capability has been observed during several documented conflicts, including the Tharsis Purge and the Zephyl Crusade, where the fortress served as both command center and artillery platform. The Dark Angel's refusal to allow external examination of these systems continues to frustrate Mechanicus scholars. Despite this, the Adeptus Mechanicus maintains a tone of reverence toward the structure, viewing it as a manifestation of ancient human mastery, technology, and geology fused into a single eternal construct. The rock, to them, stands as proof that even in the age of decay, the remnants of pre-imperial ingenuity endure, safeguarded by those who understand its sacred purpose. To the Administratum, it remains a bureaucratic enigma, but a strategic masterpiece. The fortress cannot be taxed, requisitioned, or relocated by decree. It serves the Imperium not through obedience to its paperwork, but through its continued existence as a symbol of power. Both organizations, in their own ways, acknowledge this truth. The rock's greatest strength is not its weapons, but its permanence. As Millennia 41 draws onward, the rock continues its silent orbit through the void, sometimes near Imperial space, sometimes deep beyond it, forever unchanging, forever operational. It is a geological relic that defies time, a fortress whose foundations are older than most of the Imperium's worlds, and a machine whose purpose remains constant, to serve as the unyielding heart of the First Legion. Within the sealed and shrouded structure of the rock, the Adeptus Mechanicus and associated Imperial scholars have long theorized about the potential wealth of undiscovered resources embedded within the asteroid's vast geological strata. Yet, As with all things pertaining to the Dark Angels, confirmation remains elusive. The fortress monastery's nature as both a bastion of war and a relic of the Great Crusade has made unrestricted exploration impossible, and the chapter's absolute control over its inner regions ensures that any form of resource analysis must rely on indirect data collection. From the fragments of sensor telemetry granted under restricted Mechanicus access, it is understood that the rock's internal composition bears traces of adamantium, plasteel composites, and dense ceramite analogues. These materials are not of natural formation, but remnants of ancient structural reinforcement, likely a fusion of geological mass and artificial fortification dating back to the original fortress built upon Caliban. This hybrid nature makes the rock both an architectural and geological anomaly. Its strata contain veins of metallic lattice and pseudo-organic alloys, whose bonding properties remain largely unreplicable, even by the forgers of Mars. Where natural materials persist, trace readings suggest high concentrations of ferrous and silicate minerals, along with a low but stable radiation signature, indicative of ancient reactor systems still buried deep within the lower decks. The Mechanicus hypothesized that the fortress maintains partial energy independence through a self-contained plasma reactor core, sustained by relic technology from the Dark Age of Technology, or early Imperial systems. While not openly acknowledged by the Dark Angels, several servitor reports collected during refitting operations at Imperial dockyards confirm the presence of plasma conduits, unlike those used in standard chapter vessels. Theoretical studies suggest that, were it not for its strategic importance and secrecy, the rock could serve as a valuable research site for studying geosynthetic fusion, the process by which geological bodies are fused with structural alloys to create semi-organic, self-reinforcing fortresses. Such technology, if fully understood, could drastically improve Imperial fortification architecture, yet the chapter's silence and strict containment protocols make any such studies impossible without violating Imperial law and potentially invoking inter-chapter conflict. From a scientific standpoint, the rock's preservation of Calibanite bedrock offers an unprecedented glimpse into a world long lost to history. The geological samples extracted from the lower levels contain fossilized remnants of Caliban's unique biosphere, mineral traces that hint at the planet's once violent ecology, and possibly even pre-imperial terraforming patterns. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, these samples are invaluable. They represent one of the only surviving links to a destroyed ecosystem, offering data on xenobiological evolution, atmospheric variance, and magnetic field instability that could enhance planetary engineering models. Despite this, the Dark Angels allow only cursory examination of these materials, often under the watch of the Librarius or the Reclusiam. Samples taken by Mechanicus probes are promptly returned or destroyed after analysis, with all research records reviewed by the chapter's senior archivists. This rigid process has fueled speculation among the more radical Mechanicus sects that the rock may harbour more than relic strata, that it might conceal buried relics from Caliban's pre-imperial civilizations, or even trace evidence of warp-tainted corruption. These suspicions remain unproven, though the Adeptus Administratum's record of repeated access denials has been quietly noted by the Order Hereticus. From a logistical perspective, the rock's vast stores of recyclable materials and self-contained production facilities make it nearly self-sustaining. Mechanicus analysts estimate that the fortress can maintain operational functionality for centuries without external supply, relying on deep core reclamation systems and micro-forges to recycle metallic waste and produce new munitions. This makes the rock not merely a monastery, but a mobile worldlet of war, a fortress capable of indefinite deployment across the void. The scientific benefits of full-scale study remain beyond reach. The Adeptus Mechanicus classifies the rock as Ordo Seclusum grade restricted, an object whose research value is recognized but inaccessible due to strategic interdiction. Internal Mechanicus archives contain hundreds of sealed research proposals relating to the rock's structure, power systems, and geological synthesis, all awaiting approval that will never come. In effect, the rock exists as both a treasure trove of ancient knowledge and a closed door that the Mechanicus dares not force open. For the Adeptus Administratum, this paradox is both frustrating and fascinating. To them, the rock represents the epitome of imperial compartmentalization, an object of immense scientific and logistical value, locked behind the iron discipline of a First Legion successor. Yet, even under the weight of secrecy, the Administratum continues to document every fragment of data available. Its mass readings, energy output, warp displacement patterns, and structural resonance frequencies. Over time, these have formed a silent archive of observation, a collection of incomplete data points that together sketch a shape of wonder and mystery. In the end, the rock's true potential, whether geological, technological, or scientific, remains bound by oath and silence. It is the perfect paradox of the Imperium, an artifact of immense value that cannot be studied, a world of secrets hidden in plain sight. Its resources are known but untouchable, its systems visible yet unexplainable, and its every secret locked beneath the vigilance of those who would rather guard the past than reveal it. Within the closed chambers of the Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus, few topics are approached with as much caution and unease as the fortress-monastery known as the Rock. The First Legion's home is, by its very nature, a fortress within a fortress, both physically and politically shielded from imperial oversight. For the Inquisition, whose duty is to uncover heresy and corruption wherever it festers, the Dark Angel's secrecy represents both an anomaly and a potential threat. The Inquisition's official stance toward the Rock is one of respectful distance. Though the chapter's loyalty to the Emperor is unquestioned on record, its rigid isolationism and the near-total denial of imperial inspection have led to centuries of quiet concern. What information the Inquisition possesses about the Rock is fragmentary, gathered through indirect surveillance, Mechanicus telemetry, and the rare testimony of those few outsiders permitted entry under specific wartime circumstances. These testimonies, when cross-referenced, form a picture that is both incomplete and deeply unsettling. One Ordoxenos observer described the Rock's atmosphere as thick with age, as if the air itself remembers. Energy readings taken during a sanctioned resupply at the watch station, Helios revealed an internal power signature inconsistent with standard chapter plasma cores. The readings showed faint warp flux resonance across several decks, minute but persistent, similar to those detected around relics of psychic containment or nullification fields. No further scans were permitted, and the data was sealed under inquisitorial cipher classification exemptus primaris. The Rock's internal architecture has also been noted for its anomalous magnetic field fluctuations. Unlike typical void fortresses, whose magnetic containment grids are uniform, the Rock's fields shift irregularly, forming interference patterns that obscure internal scans. Adeptus Mechanicus observers once theorized that these were side effects of residual warp scars from Caliban's destruction. The Ordo Malleus, however, has not ruled out the possibility of deliberate interference, perhaps to contain or conceal entities or phenomena that defy standard classification. A recurring concern among inquisitorial circles centers on the deep vaults, the sections of the Rock said to be sealed since the time of the Lion. Multiple accounts suggest that the deepest levels are not accessible even to most Dark Angels. One apocryphal report, retrieved from the interrogation of a rogue astropath who once served aboard the fortress, described hearing whispers in the walls and feeling the eyes of something ancient watching through the stone itself. The report was later dismissed as psychic contamination, but the description was noted for its consistency with other low-level psychic disturbances recorded by Imperial agents in proximity to the Rock's lower decks. Further unexplained phenomena include the fortress's gravitational irregularities. During warp translation, the Rock's gravimetric profile sometimes fluctuates, as if its mass were momentarily inconsistent with its physical dimensions. The Adeptus Mechanicus attributes this to imperfect integration between Calibanite rock strata and artificial structures, yet the Ordo Malleus suspects more exotic causes, possibly residual warp energy seeping through fractures formed during Caliban's cataclysmic destruction. Inquisition data files also record instances of unexplained temporal inconsistencies. Maintenance servitors assigned to the rock's external hull have occasionally logged timestamp discrepancies of several seconds to minutes compared to Imperial standard chronometers. In one notable case, a Mechanicus repair unit reported completing a 10-hour shift, while the station logs indicated only 2 hours had passed. The discrepancy was investigated and dismissed as system error, but the pattern has repeated intermittently over centuries, always localized to regions near the central vaults. When questioned regarding these anomalies, Dark Angel's representatives consistently provide identical explanations, usually invoking ancient machine spirits or lingering scars from the destruction of Caliban. Yet the mechanical precision of their responses, often verbatim across centuries, has done little to ease inquisitorial suspicion. Some within the Order Hereticus quietly argue that the rock may house more than secrets of the Legion. It may be a relic of technology beyond full Imperial comprehension. There are whispers that within its heart lies a spatial fold, a self-contained subdimension, or a sealed stasis pocket that preserves something or someone from the days of the heresy. Though no evidence has ever confirmed this, the rock's consistent warp anomalies and its total inaccessibility lend weight to such speculation. A classified Order Malleus report, Malref 10322 Caliban Fragmentum, describes the possibility that the rock's psychic field acts as both shield and prison. The theory suggests that the fortress's unique stone-metal hybrid composition, when combined with its artificial gravimetric field, might generate a low-level null zone capable of dampening psychic resonance. If true, this would make the rock a natural containment structure, an ideal site for imprisoning entities or artifacts of great psychic potency. The Dark Angel's refusal to allow deep scans may thus serve a more practical purpose than mere secrecy. Despite these findings, official inquisitorial doctrine remains restrained. No direct censure or investigation of the Dark Angels has been sanctioned since the heresy, and the political risk of challenging a first founding chapter is immense. The Inquisition's observations therefore remain confined to internal archives, marked for restricted review only. Each new report adds to a growing mosaic of half-truths, strange data, and unanswered questions. The rock endures as one of the Imperium's great enigmas, a place of faith, secrecy, and science colliding in silence. To the Inquisition, it stands as both fortress and tomb, a bastion of loyalty wrapped around a core of uncertainty. Whatever lies within those deep vaults remains unrecorded, perhaps unknowable. Yet every inquisitor who has ever looked upon the rock, whether through Auspec's lens or from the cold void of space, has felt the same unspoken understanding. There are truths within that fortress which even the Emperor's servants dare not uncover. Among the most classified archives within the Inquisition are the scattered records concerning relics recovered or rumoured to exist within the rock. Each account is fragmentary, often contradictory, and all share a common fate: heavy redaction, followed by classification under Ordo Obscurus, a sub-designation used for knowledge deemed too volatile for even most inquisitors to access. What little has escaped deletion paints an image of a fortress whose foundations may conceal technology and relics that predate the Imperium itself. The earliest recorded mention of such artifacts comes from the late 32nd millennium, during a documented interaction between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Dark Angels following a major warp incursion near the Phenon cluster. Mechanicus records refer to a Calibanic relic containment transfer aboard the rock, an operation that involved the use of triple-layered null fields, overseen by the chapter's senior librarians. When the Ordo Malleus later requested details of the object's classification, the response was a sealed communication stating that the item was of the Lion's private reserve and under direct interdiction by order of the Supreme Grand Master. The Mechanicus liaison who initially reported the event was reassigned to Mars, and all data relating to the operation was subsequently purged from the Noospheric archives. Later accounts, particularly from the 39th and early 40th millennia, suggest the rock contains multiple sealed chambers whose inscriptions bear no resemblance to High or Low Gothic. These markings, often described as runic but geometric, have resisted translation attempts even by sanctioned linguists and Mechanicus cryptographers. Some inquisitorial linguists propose that these sigils represent a proto-human or Dark Age script, while others suggest non-human origin. Whatever the case, the Dark Angels have categorically denied requests to study these engravings, citing ancient oaths of silence dating back to the Legion's Reformation. Of the few confirmed artifacts that have ever been removed from the rock, one stands apart in inquisitorial record: the Shard of the Lion's Blade. Recovered during a catastrophic breach of one of the fortress's vaults in Millennia 38, the object was a fragment of unknown alloy, exuding residual empiric radiation measurable even through leaded ceramite. The Inquisition demanded a sample for study, which the Dark Angels refused. The shard later vanished from all Mechanicus records, and several years later, Inquisitor Thane of the Order Xenos, who had pursued the matter, was declared missing in the Outer Rim while en route to the Calibanite sector. The case was never reopened. Inquisition scholars who have attempted to map the rock's internal vaults based on secondary data believe that the deepest chambers may contain relics dating back to the Unification Wars. Fragments of Proto-Astartes power armor schematics, ancient gene seed storage devices, and relic weapon cores have all been referenced in passing across restricted Mechanicus communiques. However, any direct mention of these technologies is swiftly erased from official channels. The Adeptus Terra's archives show multiple erasure orders originating from within the Grandmaster's Conclave itself, suggesting the Dark Angels maintain their own censorship protocols independent of Imperial authority. Anomalous data retrieved by the Order Malleus further suggests the existence of an artifact designated Object Caliban 01. This classification appears only in shadow records and is consistently accompanied by the term psycho-reactive containment. The descriptions are vague, but the implications severe. It is speculated that this object might be the source of the rock's intermittent warp field distortions, possibly a fragment of Caliban itself, saturated with psychic energy from the planet's destruction. If true, this would mean the rock's stability depends on a relic born from the same cataclysm that annihilated its homeworld. Such a relic would be of enormous interest to both Mechanicus and Inquisition researchers, but every attempt to investigate it has ended in sealed files or unexplained disappearances. More disturbing still are the faint traces of what may have been Xenos artifacts stored within the rock's confines. An intercepted Mechanicus manifest from the late 40th millennium references non-standard biomaterial sample containment aboard a vessel linked to the Dark Angel's supply route. The material's origin was not recorded, but its containment parameters, psychic shielding, cryogenic suspension, and a teleportation ward, suggest something beyond human manufacture. Shortly thereafter, the vessel's registry was deleted, its crew reassigned, and the manifest marked as incomplete and corrupted. The Inquisition's own knowledge of the rock's artifacts has thus become a matter of paradox. Each discovery begets another veil of secrecy. What little can be pieced together implies that the fortress functions as both a reliquary and a prison, a repository of objects that cannot or must not be destroyed. Some Ordo Malleus scholars quietly argue that the Dark Angels have taken upon themselves a sacred duty once reserved for the Emperor's custodians, the safeguarding of objects too dangerous to reveal to mankind. Others suspect a darker motive, that the chapter hoards technology and knowledge for purposes of its own. The censorship surrounding these relics is total. Every time data concerning them surfaces, a coordinated suppression follows, often originating from multiple administrative strata simultaneously, as if prearranged. This behavior has led to the unconfirmed theory that an embedded order of inquisitorial sympathizers within the High Lords themselves aids in the concealment of Calibanite secrets. While impossible to prove, the synchronized redactions across Administratum, Mechanicus, and Inquisition databases defy coincidence. In the rare instances where partial data has survived erasure, the recovered fragments indicate experimentation involving psychically active materials. These reports describe containment fields tuned to frequencies designed to neutralize empiric resonance, similar to those used in the containment of minor warp entities. If the rock indeed houses such relics, the implication is staggering. It would mean the Dark Angels possess the knowledge to stabilize or neutralize warp-tainted artifacts without direct aid from the Order Malleus or the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Such knowledge, if ever confirmed, would be classified as heresy cognita. Yet the secrecy persists. The Dark Angel's silence, rather than condemnation, has led many inquisitors to a reluctant respect. The fortress-monastery remains operational, stable, and free from recorded outbreaks or warp breaches across millennia. Whatever lies within its vaults, it has remained contained. In an Imperium plagued by instability and corruption, that fact alone grants the rock a form of legitimacy, an argument used by its defenders within the Conclave to discourage further investigation. Knowledge buried becomes myth. Myth becomes heresy. When truth is sealed too long, it ceases to protect. It begins to rot. I fear the rock is no longer merely a fortress. It is a wound, bandaged in stone. Her words were later stricken from the record, her name erased from the official registry. But the sentiment remains among those who study the unspoken truths of the Dark Angels. For within the rock's eternal shadow, the line between preservation and concealment blurs until it vanishes altogether. The Inquisition has learned to stop asking questions it cannot afford to answer. The rock, after all, is not a place where truths are revealed. It is where they are entombed. The rock's secrecy has survived the scrutiny of millennia, yet fragments of testimony, visual, verbal, and psychically transmitted, have managed to breach its shroud. The following accounts, collected from declassified inquisitorial fragments and unsanctioned picked feeds, offer the closest approximation of what occurs within and around the fortress monastery. None of these sources are complete. Many have been redacted beyond context. Yet when aligned, they suggest a truth that neither the Dark Angels nor the Imperium are eager to confront. The first recovered picked feed originates from a Mechanicus probe assigned to perform external maintenance on the rock's outer hull in Millennia 39. The feed begins with the expected static distortion common to operations near the fortress' gravitic shell. The image stabilizes to reveal the basalt-like surface of Calibanite stone fused with ceramite plates, a seamless merge of organic and synthetic strata. As the probe's sensor drone pans across a fissure line, a sudden flicker appears, an illumination deep within the rock face, too rhythmic to be random. The light pulses once every 7 seconds, in a sequence later found to match a binary pattern. Before the pattern could be decoded, the transmission abruptly ceases. The Mechanicus log records the event as instrument failure. The Inquisition's internal classification labels it possible signal source origin unconfirmed. A later pick feed, taken by a sanctioned Imperial Navy gunship during a joint operation near the Diastara Belt, captured an event referred to as the silent convergence. In the footage, the rock drifts silently through the void, its engines inactive. Then, for precisely 12 minutes, its entire surface emits a faint green luminescence, similar in spectral analysis to psychic resonance seen in warp-reactive materials. No energy spikes, no communication signals, just the glow, spreading across its surface like a heartbeat beneath stone. The light fades as suddenly as it appeared. All subsequent telemetry data for that period was corrupted beyond recovery. The official statement issued to the fleet described the anomaly as static reflection caused by cosmic interference. Unofficially, Ordo Malleus analysts hypothesized it to be an internal realignment of null fields, possibly linked to containment stabilization. Eyewitness accounts, though rare and often inconsistent, add further complexity. A retired Adeptus Mechanicus engine seer named Varric Luthen claimed to have spent 2 weeks aboard the rock during a sanctioned repair cycle. His official report describes nothing unusual, yet a private confession recorded years later contradicts this. Luthen stated that deep within the fortress, he heard what he called a choir beneath the stone. According to his words, it was not sound but vibration, resonating through the metal decking. When he asked his Dark Angel escorts about it, they replied only, "You are hearing our silence." Luthen's confession was archived under restricted Ordo Malleus custody. He later requested cognitive purging and lived the remainder of his life in the Schola Mechanicus archives on Mars. Another testimony from a servitor maintenance log may be less poetic but equally revealing. Unit MA-9. Helion, a servo-automaton programmed for hydraulic calibration, recorded an error in its auditory sensors while operating near one of the lower chambers. The corrupted audio file contains 3.7 seconds of low-frequency interference resembling human speech, though reversed and slowed. When the file was analysed by Ordo-Xenos linguists, the waveform pattern bore uncanny resemblance to pre-Imperial Calibanite dialect structures. Attempts to replicate or amplify the signal led to complete system failure in 3 consecutive data servitors. The recording was subsequently erased, though a transcript of the waveform pattern remains preserved within the sealed archives of the Tricorn Palace on Terra. An even rarer case emerged in Millennia 40, when an inquisitorial agent embedded within the Adeptus Astra Telepathica reported receiving an untraceable psychic transmission while stationed aboard the fleet that escorted the rock through the Karen expanse. The message consisted of a single phrase repeated 6 times: "The lion watches beneath." The astropath collapsed shortly after transmitting the report and died 3 days later from acute synaptic trauma. His remains were cremated, and his ashes interred anonymously under the designation Psyche Null 02. Among the most debated pictorial records is the so-called Vault image sequence, an unverified set of 3 pict captures believed to have been smuggled from the rock by a rogue data clerk in the late 39th millennium. The first image depicts a chamber lined with monolithic structures resembling sarcophagi or containment pods. The second shows a group of robed figures surrounding a single pod, their faces obscured. The third, partially degraded, reveals what appears to be a humanoid silhouette inside the containment unit, massive, armoured, and motionless. The image metadata confirms no date or origin, and the Inquisition's official position is that the sequence is fabricated. Yet within certain circles of the Ordo Hereticus, whispers persist that these images may document the preservation of something, or someone, no longer entirely human. Every witness, every scrap of data, every corrupted pict feed seems to echo the same underlying unease, that the rock's silence conceals motion, that its stillness hides activity too deliberate to be coincidence. The fortress is not simply resting in the void, it is listening. From the Inquisition's final perspective, the rock represents an enigma that transcends standard classification. Its political and military influence shield it from direct investigation, while its spiritual and technological anomalies defy rational understanding. For some Inquisitors, it stands as a symbol of the Imperium's unspoken contradictions, a chapter beyond reproach that refuses illumination, a fortress of faith built upon the ashes of a fallen world tainted by warp corruption. The Ordo Malleus summarizes the matter with bureaucratic precision. Observation continues, intervention unnecessary until failure of containment is verified. Yet within private logs, a different sentiment emerges. Inquisitor Cael Theron, upon reviewing a composite of all known reports, concluded his dossier with the following notation: "The rock is not a fortress, it is an anchor, one that holds something vast beneath the surface of our understanding. The Dark Angels guard it not from us, but from what would emerge if they ceased." His words remain sealed within the archives, marked Observation Level Omega. No further investigations have been sanctioned since that entry. The rock continues to drift through the stars, its engines silent, its secrets intact. Whatever truths lie within its depths are now bound in perpetual secrecy, known only to the First Legion, and perhaps, in the faintest whispers of the warp, to the Emperor himself.